Good morning and welcome to week 2 of the talk, Is Jainism compatible with Western philosophy? I hope that you and your family are safe and well. Last week, we talked about the fundamental theories of Jainism, including the 6 key substances that constitute the Jain universe, the concept of the soul, and even karma theory. This week, we are going to move on to the Western philosophers and compare them to Jainism. Of course, there are going to be vast differences, but what I'm more interested in is the overlap. I find it fascinating that two completely different schools of thought, probably completely unaware of each other's presence, came to quite similar conclusions. Any talk on Western philosophy would be lacking if the big three were not mentioned, namely Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates, who was around 470 to 399 BC, is thought to be the father of Western philosophy. He was one of the earliest moral philosophers in the Western tradition of thought, and his contributions to ethics and epistemology have shaped the thinking of many notable philosophers. Since he made no writings himself, most of what is known about him is through the works of his student, most notably Plato. We can draw a similarity to Lord Mahavir. He himself just gave sermons and didn't write anything down, since the main method of teaching in those times were through word of mouth. And only later on, after his death, did the acharyas, the gurus, begin to write down his words. Socrates was actually sentenced to death, as he was charged with corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens and of impiety, which means not believing in the gods of the state. His death is described in the final of Plato's most famous dialogue, Phaedo. It is set in the final hours of Socrates' death, which he chose to spend with his friends in his prison cell before drinking the poison. The subject of Phaedo is the immortality of the soul. It is striking to see how similar Socrates is and the Jain view of the soul, birth, and death really is. In Phaedo, Socrates explores various arguments for the soul's immortality to show that there is an afterlife in which the soul continues to exist after death. This shows us that Socrates himself actually believed that the soul exists, and moreover, that it is immortal. I will be going over the 3 main arguments offered by Socrates. Firstly, the opposites argument. The soul has to be immortal in order to counter the mortal nature of our bodies. It is also known as the cyclical argument, as it explains the cycle of life and death. According to Socrates, the soul withdraws completely intact from the physical body at our death, and enters another body at birth. The soul, which brings life, is eternal and unchanging. As discussed last week, Jains believe the exact same thing. The soul, Jiv, is one of the 6 dravyas, the 6 real substances composing the universe. Jains also believe that upon death, the soul leaves its physical body and until liberation constantly resides in some other body. Socrates says that the soul brings life, and we too believe that the Jiv is the only living substance in the universe. Everything else is ajiv, non-living entities. Secondly, the recollection argument. This theory is another way of explaining the soul's immortality. Socrates' view is that learning is actually an art of recollecting things that we knew before we were born. Socrates believes that true knowledge is eternal and unchanging. Likewise, Jains believe in 2 types of knowledge, indirect and direct. Indirect knowledge is from our senses or when we read and gain extra knowledge. Direct knowledge is from the soul. This is why we have an innate understanding for some things. For example, we were not taught how to breathe, yet it is essential for life. Also, we can instantly tell when 2 things are different and when 2 things are the same. He then concludes that we are recollecting something from before birth, and thus the soul exists before birth. This is strikingly similar to the Jain belief. One of the main qualities of the soul is infinite knowledge, which is also known as kevalnan. Due to the karma on our souls, we do not have infinite knowledge, but instead we have limited knowledge. In Jainism, we also believe that there are 2 types of knowledge, direct knowledge, which is from the soul, and indirect knowledge, which is from our senses. Lastly, the affinity argument. Socrates had a belief that there are 2 kinds of existence, one from the visible world that we can perceive with our senses, and secondly, the invisible world of forms that we can access solely with our minds, which is divine, immortal, and eternal. Physical bodies cannot go to this world of forms, but souls can. The soul is more like a second world, whereas our physical body is more like the first world. This once again is very similar to the Jain philosophy. We believe that infinite bliss can only be attained once the soul has shed all of its karma. It then goes to Siddhila, which is the place of liberation for pure souls. The physical world is where our physical bodies reside. However, if upon death the soul is impure, so it still has karmic bondages on the soul, it would stay in the samsari life, the cycle of life and death, in one of the four life forms, the human life form, plant or animals, the heavenly bodies, or the hellish bodies. Next, I would like to talk about René Descartes. Born at the end of the 16th century, he was a mathematician, a scientific thinker, as well as being a metaphysician. He is most famously known for his words cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Descartes is also the originator of Cartesian doubt, which is a style of philosophy where you doubt all beliefs in order to reach the conclusion of what is certainly true. Logical skepticism is used to doubt one's own belief in order to reach the conclusion of what you can be certain is really true. This is the basis of his famous cogito statement, as Descartes said that he was able to doubt everything apart from the fact that he was doubting. And since he was doubting, and doubting is a form of thinking, there must be a thinker to do the thinking. And therefore, by being certain of the fact that he is thinking, he is certain of himself. That is where the statement comes from. Jains believe this to some extent as well. Knowledge and the ability to think comes from the soul. All classifications of the ajiv dravya, so the non-living substances, are unable to think and will have no concept of I am. For example, a table or a chair cannot think, whereas we can. Descartes was also a believer of dualism, of the mind and the body. Descartes could doubt the existence of his body, but because of the cogito, he could not doubt the existence of his mind. Therefore, he thought that the mind and the body were two separate entities. Jains too believe this by saying the soul and the body are different. The soul is jiv, which is living, and the body is ajiv, which is non-living. Lord Mahavir simply described the interaction between jiv and ajiv through the no tattva, taught to me very simply through a boat analogy. Imagine the mind is inside the boat, and the water surrounding the boat is the ajiv, which in this case is the karma. When there is a hole in the boat, the water comes in contact with the inside of the boat, and therefore, while the inside of the boat and the water are distinct substances, there is a key relationship between them. Descartes also had other thoughts which essentially opposed Jain philosophy, with regard to his conclusions about non-human animals. He believed that they do not feel pain and are essentially like machines, robots, or even automations. He did not regard animals to have a sense of mind. To Descartes, all non-human animals were just objects that reacted instinctively to events. They were essentially mindless. Humans, therefore, being full of mind, did not have to be mindful at all about how they were to treat non-human animals. He said we should act the same towards a pig or a cat as we would towards a chair leg or even a table. Descartes was against animals and would not support any concept of vegetarianism, which is completely opposite to what Jainism believes. The essence of the Jain way of life is non-violence. It is one of the few religions that propagates vegetarianism and even veganism. Now, let's look at Immanuel Kant, an influential German philosopher born in the 18th century. He is particularly noted for his influence on epistemology and ethics. As a break from all the metaphysics, we will look deeper into what Kantian ethics are. In order to determine what is right, we use a combination of reason and consideration for other people. He believed that everyone has a certain morality that is independent of their other religious beliefs. For example, if you are a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jain, your morality is independent of your religious beliefs. Now I will go over the two classes of action. Firstly, hypothetical imperatives. These are actions we ought to take if we have a particular goal. If we want to get rich, we need to get a job. And if we want to get a job, we need to study. Secondly, we have categorical imperatives. These are actions that we ought to take, regardless of whether doing so would enable us to get anything we want. Morality should be viewed like this because it is derived from pure reason and logic. It is our moral obligation to follow this. It could even be viewed as a moral law, which is binding on all of us. There are two subsections of categorical imperatives. Firstly, universalizability, which says you should act only according to that maxim whereby you can. At the same time, will that become a universal law? That is quite confusing. So in simple terms, you should only act to someone else in a way that you would be happy to be treated yourself. This is quite similar to the Jain belief of karma, of whatever goes round comes round. Secondly, we have humanity. You should never treat someone just as a tool to accomplish your own goals, but instead keep in mind that they are their own independent person. Jains also believe this. We believe that all souls are independent and equal, and what's unique to Jainism is that we extend this to animals. Kant was an absolutist. He believed that there are no exceptions to moral rules. Under no circumstances should one lie, because it inevitably affects others. Utilitarianism, by Betham, almost counters this. The greatest good for the greatest number is the foundation for morals and legislation. The consequences define the morality of any action. Jainism ties both of these concepts together beautifully. We have Mahavrats, which are the major vows, and Anuvrats, which are the minor vows. Mahavrats are the absolute vows, undertaken by monks and nuns, whereas Anuvrats are undertaken by lay people, us. As Jainism recognizes that an absolutist way of life is not practical for people in the modern world. In that way, the intention of an action is a great contributor to what karma we get. And that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Jain Assembly. I hope you learned something new over the past 2 weeks, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me at sha007@habsboys.org.uk. Have a great day and stay safe.